But this evening, we are here to look back into our revolutionary history, which we're all about this year for the 250th. And John and I were talking one day in the library earlier this summer, and he was telling me all this stuff, and he was so excited about Thomas Lewis and all the little tidbits. And I said, would you like to speak at a Third Thursday talk? And how could he say no? So here he is. John Batzel has lived in Roanoke, Virginia since 1991, is a 1986 graduate of Virginia Tech, and has worked his entire career at Carter Machinery Company. His mother, Nina Dolly Messersmith of Grottoes, planted a deep appreciation of the Shenandoah Valley, particularly Rockingham County, history in her son. Her stories of people and places and her pride in their family lines inspired a similar passion that continues to drive Batzel's research and additions to the narrative. And if that isn't enough, he is Thomas Lewis's 5 times great-grandson. So he is here today to talk about his family tree, and I'd like everybody to give him a warm welcome. Let's see if I can do this without.
Thank you, Penny.
Thank you.
How about now?
You're good now.
I'm good now. All right. Thank you, Penny. But no, it's good to be here. Family, I was earlier, I think the Kahlers were the first to walk in. They live at Lewiston, which was part of the Thomas Lewis estate down by Linwood. And then, of course, my good friend Andy Dixon, he lives at Riverbank, which was the Yancey home down by the Merck plant and Coors plant near Hilltop, which is also the Yancey home, all part of the greater Thomas Lewis estate. I have a lot of slides, and I have to apologize. I'm going to try to get through it. I probably won't, but I'm going to give it a shot. So I'm going to talk fast. If there's a few slides and I'm behind, I might just go through them quickly. Most of you probably know a little bit about Thomas Lewis, though. Of course, he was born in 1718 in Northern Ireland. He came over in the 1730s, part of that big Scotch-Irish migration from Northern Ireland. He settled in 1732 in what I'll call Stanton. It wasn't Stanton then. It was probably more Bellamy Manor is a better description. In 1732 with his father, John Lewis, and his mother, Margaret Lynn Lewis. In 1732, when they settled there, it was part of Spotsylvania County. Because if you rewind the tape way back, Arnie wasn't formed until like 1734, and Augusta County is what was formed from Orange County in like 1738. But because there weren't enough citizens or population in Augusta then, the county wasn't created really until 1745. And that's where Thomas Lewis, at 27 years old, becomes surveyor of Augusta County that stretched to the Mississippi. So he had a big job on his hands. Dr. Sarah Hughes, Dave Ingram, you probably know that name. She wrote a great book called Surveyors and Statesmen. She was, I think, a professor at William & Mary, and she wrote a great book. I just want to read one excerpt from that I thought sums up the surveyor of the 18th century in Virginia. Those men who were fortunate enough to become principal surveyors in counties on the edge of settlement could command and expected handsome rewards in wealth, political power, and social status. Surveying, like the law, was one of the respectable ladders to the top of Virginia's 18th century society. And you got to think about surveyors at that time in the mid-18th century. They did the work of government. They're the ones who bestowed crown-owned lands to individuals, land companies, folks like that. You got to remember, back then, there were no banks, there was no stock market, hard currency was rare. What you had a lot of that could be an attainable form of durable wealth was land. So you can imagine when Thomas Lewis became surveyor, he had a big job on his hands because people wanted to develop land. I got to remember, I'll probably start talking, forget to fast forward through the slides here. So there's no, I'm not sure, is this working, Gideon?
There's a switch on the side.
On the side. Oh, there you go. So let me back up. There's no portrait, unfortunately, of Thomas Lewis. So I'm calling that Thomas Lewis with his back to you, surveying in the 18th century. How about that? Okay? So just real quick, I mean, growing up, like Penny said, my mother was Rockingham County. She talked to me about the Yanceys and the Moseys and the Lewises and the Nicholases and the Harrisons. And I knew a little bit about all of them, but not a lot. And I remember in 2013, I was on the internet, and Jeff Evans Auctions over here in Mount Crawford had a sale of area items. And this pops up on it. A tobacco box with Thomas Lewis's name in 1773 on it. And I said, I am going to go to that auction, okay? And then I started doing more research on it. Again, this is 13 years ago. And I get there, and right off, it's like a rocket ship, the prices go up. Next thing I know, this tobacco box sells for $10,000, okay? So I walked out of there thinking, well, shucks, I didn't get it. But the cool thing is, I found out later, and I was over at Jeff Auctions Auctions, I asked him who purchased it. The American Revolutionary War Museum at Yorktown. And I thought, that is pretty cool, okay? So there, I went to Yorktown. This is some years later I found out, so I go to the museum. I walk in, the colonial exhibit up front. You see the area on the right? There's a tobacco box. And I'll go ahead and blow up for you, I'll let you read the description there. And I thought, once you read that real quick, I thought the description nailed it. I mean, Thomas Lewis indeed was a leading patriot or Virginian patriot in the Valley during that time. And he didn't fire a shot. His role was not military. I'm going to talk about him here in a minute, a description of him by his grandson, Samuel Hance Lewis. His contribution was in other things like the Virginia Conventions. But his family were military men. If you include the Battle of Point Pleasant, which I'm going to talk about, he had 3 brothers, 3 sons, 6 son-in-laws, 9 nephews, and a host of Valley friends who either fought in the Virginia militia or the Continental Army, okay? I was telling the Kaylors when they walked in this evening that there's a lot of descriptions about Thomas Lewis. The one I like best is written by his grandson, Samuel Hance Lewis of Lewiston, Linwood. He was born in 1794, so it was 4 years after his grandfather's death, but his father was Charles Lewis, who built Linwood in 1814, okay? And I thought, well, that's probably the best description because, his father's telling about his father. So let me read you what he said about Thomas Lewis. The defective side of Thomas Lewis, let me back up here. There are many, Thomas Lewis, Samuel Hance Lewis wrote, the defective side of Thomas Lewis prevented him from joining his gallant brothers in the field. With the aid of glasses, which he always used, he was hardly able to tell an Indian from a white man at the distance of 20 yards or paces. I have heard that he was 6 feet in height. His eyes and hair were dark, his complexion fair. I have heard him spoken of as handsome, fine-looking man. It is said that my elder brother Thomas resembled his features. He was exceedingly nearsighted and was under the necessity of using glasses habitually. There is no family portrait of him that I know of. He was of a grave and serious temper, strict, perhaps rigid. He was possessed of a liberal education, was probably one of the best mathematicians of the day. Of course, surveying required that, okay? And the state. He had a literary taste, and when not engaged in business or occupied with company, he was generally to be found in his library. His collection of books was very extensive and very valuable, embracing many of the most important works of the day in history, biography, philosophy, government law, military theology, and poetry. And I probably found about 40 letters of Thomas Lewis over the years of my research. A lot of them are at the Wisconsin Historical Society, the Virginia Historical Society, the Historical Society of Southwest Virginia in Roanoke. And, you read those letters, and they're great. And a lot of them are to his friend, I'll talk about here in a little bit, William Preston. I mean, he was somebody who called it like he saw it. He didn't sugarcoat it. I mean, he was a tough guy, but he did things the right way, I think. This here is just two of these books I have with me today. You're welcome to look at them. You see there his book plate, Men of the Day like William Preston, and he was very prominent in Southwest Virginia. Men like Thomas Lewis, men like Gabriel Jones of Bogota, his neighbor, his brother-in-law, had big libraries. Some say the biggest libraries on the frontier, west of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And a lot of them, of course, books were valuable. Then they put these nice book plates in the front cover, and this is Thomas Lewis's book plate of one of the books. This here is a photo I took at the Virginia, and I'm going to try to make this like a show and tell and go fast. I don't bore you all to death, okay? So this is a photo of Thomas Lewis's estate. He died in 1790, and this is his estate inventory. I found this at the Historical Society in Richmond, and he had a lot of books. This is just a few of the pages. The arrows point to the two I have here today, and one I will speak of. This is you can go and look at this today in Stanton, in the Augusta County Courthouse in Stanton. His surveys are there. This one here I'm showing, not necessarily for the survey itself. It is pretty cool. It's from 1752, and he is surveying what will become his Linwood property there, off 340 at Linwood on the river, and he mentions his neighbor, his brother-in-law across the river, Gabriel Jones, okay? But what I want to really touch on is, what's at the bottom here? Okay, so if any of y'all like Kenny and Marshall here, and for y'all that have a UVA connection or a JMU connection, I apologize, because I'm going to spend time talking about Thomas Lewis and his connection to William and Mary, W&L, and my Hokies at Virginia Tech, okay? All right? So you Dukes and Wahoos, hang in there with me, okay? All right? But this is interesting. This is about College of William and Mary. Now, one thing I didn't know, and Mr. Ingram, you probably are aware of this, because Dave was a surveyor, is that in 1693, when the College of William and Mary was chartered, the colony appointed William and Mary as the surveyor general of the colony, which required it to license, examine, and commission all county surveyors. And 1/6 of their fees, okay, had to be paid to the College of William and Mary. So it was like an ongoing endowment of funds for the college. And think about how many acres of land there was to survey in vast Augusta County. It was a pretty good revenue stream for William and Mary. And in all my research, I've read a lot of times where Thomas Lewis is going to Williamsburg to pay his surveyor fees to the college. And if you look at the bottom there, it says, June 1752, settled with the college for all surveys recorded before or above this line. And then this next page, I went backwards. Okay, I'm going to fast forward to 1786. I'm trying to stay in chronological order with the Revolution, but I'm going to jump real quick. I found this within the last 6 months at the special collections in William and Mary. And you can see it's a pretty long thing, a lot of surveys. And if you blow it up, it reads, Thomas Lewis of Rockingham, on account with the College of William and Mary for surveys made in that county that had been admitted to record since the last statement with the college in 1786. 4 years before he died. You got to realize this. Thomas Lewis became a surveyor in 1745 when he was 27. He, for the next 45 years until his death, he was the Augusta County, then Rockingham County surveyor of that entire period of time. So again, he's up there in age and he's going to Williamsburg to pay his fees, or not, excuse me, his surveyor fees. One thing, you probably can't read it, but what grabbed me here are the names. Gabriel Jones, Felix Gilbert, the Geigers, the Skidmores, the Smiths, the Harrisons, the Cravers, Berkey, they're all listed there. Felix Gilbert had a store at Peel's Crossroads. He was a merchant, okay? So all these Valley folks, he's doing these surveys for. And Susan, there is an Armstrong listed, by the way, okay? So anyway, 1745 becomes a surveyor. He's surveying his home life. As I get to the Revolution and the very influential people that Thomas Lewis worked with, okay, in 1774, 5, and 6. He was almost a generation ahead of him. He was born in 1718. In 1745, he's 27. George Washington and Richard Henry Lee are 13. Patrick Henry is 9 years old. Thomas Nelson Jr. is 7. Thomas Jefferson is 2. Okay? James Madison is not even born yet. He's not born for 6 years later in 1751. So Thomas Lewis is, again, more of that generation before. Okay? One thing I thought about this evening, and I got to talk faster here, I'm sorry, is his connection with George Washington. I told Penny, I'm going to talk about the Revolution. If you talk about the Revolution, the most important figure or best known is probably George Washington, right? And George Washington had a connection with the Lewises, okay? And over a period of probably 10 years here, I found letters that they would write related to George Washington's lands he had in the Ohio River Valley, which was part of Augusta County, okay? And so then I was thinking, what was the connection? Well, a couple of things. George Washington was a surveyor. At 17 years old, he was commissioned by William and Mary to be a surveyor for Culpeper County. That's one connection. So I'm sure over the years they crossed paths in Williamsburg, probably paying their surveyor fees. The second thing is, if any of y'all, Penny, I watched Young Washington last night to do my homework for today, okay? And if you watch that movie, Kelsey Grammer plays Lord Fairfax. And Young Washington, the movie, he's over there visiting with Lord Fairfax. Well, Lord Fairfax is who basically hired Thomas Lewis to do the Fairfax line. He had this vast amount of land he got from like King Charles II that really didn't have good boundaries. So you then have they had to settle what was the boundaries between Fairfax and the colony. So they said, let's have it surveyed. Let's have a map done. So Thomas Lewis was at 27, 28 years old. He was picked by Lord Fairfax to represent him during the line. And who was representing the colony is Peter Jefferson, Thomas's father. Okay? There was 2 surveyors each. So they have that connection. Okay? Another connection, real quick, is through Thomas's younger brother. 1720 is Andrew Lewis. Probably more well known than Thomas. He was a military man. Andrew Lewis, born in 1720. He's in the Virginia militia in the 40s. He is then in the Virginia regiment, okay, not the militia, but the full-time Virginia regiment that Dinwiddie creates for the French and Indian War with George Washington's lieutenant colonel, then colonel. Andrew is one of his captains, even though he's 13 years older, okay? So they have that connection. Andrew's with Washington at Fort Necessity, and he's wounded there, okay, in 54. Fast forward to 58 during the French and Indian War. They're in the Forbes expedition where they're in different detachments. Andrew Lewis attacks Fort Duquesne, the French hold, which later became Fort Penn. He's wounded, captured. He's a prisoner in Quebec for a year, okay? But they keep their correspondence going, Andrew Lewis and George Washington, really for their lifetimes, that connection. Really, let me just get through this. I'll come back to the French and Indian War and the lands that Washington's talking about. Let me give you this connection too. And I told Penny, I always find this fascinating, that this connection between George Washington and Thomas Lewis. You have 3 men, the clerk of court for newly formed Augusta County, John Madison of Madison Hall. You have Thomas Lewis, the surveyor of Augusta County. You have Gabriel Jones, the Valley lawyer, the first Commonwealth attorney of Rockingham County. They live within 3 miles of each other. Thomas Lewis at Linwood, Gabriel Jones at Pagoda, 3 miles upriver in Port Republic, not there then, but it was Madison Hall and Madison. All 3 marry Strawber's sisters 100 miles away in Fredericksburg. How in the world did that happen? I mean, think about that. This is 1740s, okay? And you see here William Strawder, who I guess would be my 6 times great-grandfather. He was a pretty well-to-do House of Burgesses member in King George County there in Fredericksburg. He dies young, at 35, whatever, I think was what it says. Leaves his wife with 6 daughters, the youngest of which Jane, who Thomas Lewis would marry in 1749. You got, of course, and you have the other 3 other lists. It just fascinates me. I think how they became connected is Thomas Lewis had an uncle, Margaret Lynn Lewis, of John Lewis's wife, had an older brother named William Lynn. He was born in 1690, a contemporary of Strother. He comes to the U.S. and settles in 1720s in Fredericksburg, okay? So, and he was also involved, I think, with the Royal or the Ohio Land Company. So he's probably writing to the Lewises in the valley saying, hey, let's develop some land together, this or that. They probably visit one another. There is a will of William Lynn that talks about the Lewises. So I think it's probably through that connection they meet the Strother girls. Fast forward, he dies in 32. In 38, his wife sells the Strother home to Augustine Washington, George's father. Okay, George is 6 years old. They move into the Strother home. You see there in the lower left, the Strother home today that was rebuilt in 2017, and Kenmore, a fantastic home in Fredericksburg owned by Fielding Lewis, no relation to my Lewises, but he is the brother-in-law of George Washington. Okay, those two homes are owned by the foundation, and they rebuilt, let me back up here. They rebuilt a home that is there today, okay? George lives there. The myth about cutting down the cherry tree happens at the Ferry Farm, okay? And so the Lewises, and she's born in 32, Jane, Thomas's wife, same year as Washington. So who knows if they're childhood friends? There's some writing about that, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But anyway, that home stays in the Washington family until 1774, right at the edge of the Revolution. In 72, George's mother moves into town of Fredericksburg. Her home is still there today. And then George, when Lawrence, his brother, dies, in 54, he moves to Mount Vernon, okay? All right, I got to talk fast here. All right, real quick, this here I found. This is a 1768 letter of Gabriel Jones to George. Basically, it's about a parcel of land at Ferry Farm they're trying to settle out. And what ended up happening, I found the ledger of George Washington. Gabriel Jones, John Madison, Thomas Lewis each paid George £7 for this, not disputed land, but whatever's going on here. And I just thought that was a letter there on the Founders Online related to George Washington. Mentions the bottom bullet there, mentions about the three brothers-in-law and the George Washington connection. Okay? Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. And there's the rebuilt home today. Now we get to the Revolution, okay? Be real quick. Most of these, y'all have heard about these. You know, this is the Revolution back to the French and Indian War from 54 to 63. You know, the English win. They get a vast land area. They just had a war with France, ran up big debts. To write down those debts, to have an income stream, they turn to the colonies. And they try to tax the colonies. They try to keep repackaging taxes, and each time the colonists are pushing back, saying, no, that's a tax without our consent. Only our local colonial legislatures can tax us. Stop trying, okay? And that's what goes on, the no taxation without representation you hear, because, again, the England's trying to make up some of those war debts. So real quick, if I go back, I'm going to touch on the last two there. 1773 is the Boston Tea Party. Okay. After that, you have the Intolerable Acts are done, which close the port of Boston. Okay. So all that is going on right now, and then you have. In 74, Dunmore absolves the House of Burgesses when they call for a day of fasting and prayer because they want to be in solidarity with the Bostonians. And then I found this book here. I was on the internet, random search. I found this Thomas Lewis book from a Connecticut rare bookseller, okay? Just random, I found it. But the topic is pretty interesting. It's Blackstone's Appendix, Volume 5, okay? And that's what you see on the screen there. That's the front title page with Thomas Lewis's signature and his sons above that. Charles Lewis, when Thomas died, he wrote his oldest sons out of the will because they were gamblers and drinkers. He gave all those books to his two youngest sons, Charles and William Benjamin Strother Lewis, on government and law. Well, this book's on government, okay, and law. So Charles got it, and on the other cover page is this book was sold at the 1832 sale at Linwood when Charles died. That's the provenance of that. And this is pretty interesting here that what's this book about? Well, Blackstone was a judge, a jurist, pretty well known in England. I'll just read here. Blackstone's work is considered the definitive pre-revolutionary source on common law, bringing much to define conceptions of personal rights and the relationship between English citizen and government. You can see all the bullet points there. So I won't go into it. They were published in 61 to 65 in Oxford, but the important edition, and this was rare, you didn't have a lot of books published, I think, in America at this time, is the edition published in Philadelphia by Robert Bell. I'm not sure if you noticed the bottom there. See, printed to the subscriber list by Robert Bell, Philadelphia, 1773, okay? By the way, William Blackstone there, I think you guys, I'll let y'all read the bullets. Where do you think that statue is located? You probably think it's either in Oxford or probably London. Again, this guy wrote about the rights of Englishmen, but he approved the Stamp Act. He supported the crown, but he believed in, just like back in the Magna Carta days, all Englishmen had rights, okay? That statue is on Pennsylvania Avenue at the United States Courthouse in D.C. Isn't that remarkable? I mean, you got William Blackstone, an Englishman. They thought enough of him for that statue to be in D.C., okay? Moving on real quick. This is interesting. So I get this book. I want to learn more about it. I found that the William and Mary Quarterly, an old book probably from the 20s or 30s, had the subscriber list. And this is what really fascinates me, is that this is 1773. You had these valley men, merchants, surveyor, military men, subscribing to Blackstone to learn about the rights of Englishmen, preparing their thoughts on how they're going to push back against the crown and everything going on with all the taxation and everything else. So I thought it was fascinating. If you look here, you got the two bottom men. Daniel Smith was also my 5 times great-grandfather. He was a contemporary of Thomas Lewis. Smithland, for all Harrisonburg folks, that's Daniel Smith and his older brother Abraham, okay? They're farmers and military men. They're subscribing. You got here some names you probably recognize: Peter Hall, Gabriel Jones, Thomas Lewis, Captain Thomas Marshall of Dunmore, which became Shenandoah County. He bought it for his 17-year-old son, John Marshall, okay? And then you have Captain Samuel McDowell at the bottom. He's who served with Thomas Lewis at all the conventions representing Augusta County. So you had all these men in the valley subscribing and reading and formulating their thoughts about how they're going to plead their case to the crown or eventually get their independence. Now we get to the Virginia conventions. You have the Boston Tea Party. You have the Intolerable Acts. Again, House of Burgesses do a day of fasting and prayer. Dunmore dissolves the House of Burgesses, okay? Of course, the Burgesses says, fine, you can do that, but we're going to go off here and meet in Raleigh Tavern, and we're going to call for a General Congress of the Colonies, and also we're going to call for another gathering of men. We can't call them the House of Burgesses, so we're going to call them the Virginia Conventions. It's a provisional unauthorized self-governing body of former burgesses and new members like Thomas Lewis that would essentially govern the colony, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial functions of the colony for really the next 3 years, 1774, 5, and 6, until you have the first Constitution of Virginia written in July of 76 that created the Commonwealth of Virginia. So the Virginia conventions were a big deal, okay? They were a big deal. Here you have all the conventions. The first one, Thomas Lewis did not attend, okay? He did not attend. But the rest of them he did. So look at the dates. Look at where they were between Richmond and Williamsburg. I threw in at the bottom the General Assembly. Thomas Lewis attended the very first House of Delegates meeting okay, after the Constitution was created. What really interested me is, think about this, I Googled it, how many days did it take on horseback to ride from Linwood across Swift-Run Gap to Williamsburg or Richmond? Came back and said 5 to 7 days. So think about Thomas Lewis back and forth, pretty much for 2 full years attending these conventions that really established the direction the colony took militarily, politically, and government-wise, okay? All right, so August of 74, you have the House of Burgesses, okay? You had the first Virginia Convention. Thomas doesn't go. That's in August. In May, a little bit earlier, Dunmore started what was called Dunmore's War, okay? Dunmore, he was a shyster. He was a character, okay? He was greedy. He wanted land for himself. He wanted land for the colony. So when you had the French and Indian War conclude, you had, of course, you had all this debt. Wars are expensive. King George III, immediately after the war, says, I'm going to do a proclamation line of 1763. That's going to forbid colonists to do any settlement beyond the Blue Ridge, the Appalachian Mountains, okay? Well, that didn't sit well with colonists, land companies, and veterans of the French and Indian War like Andrew Lewis and George Washington, because Governor Dinwiddie, to entice them to serve, set aside like 200,000 acres for bounty lands. And all of that was put on hold because of the proclamation line. Didn't sit well, but fast forward, and that was in 63, 73, 10 years later, and it created all kinds of headache for Thomas Lewis because people were trying to get around it, and all this letter writing I've read between him and Preston, people are trying to get around these rules, including Washington, to try to get their land, and he's pushing, giving them the Heisman, he's pushing back on George Washington and others, okay? 1773, Dunmore really violates the crown and dips his toe in the water and starts surveying, okay, in that Ohio River Valley. Well, the Indians, the Shawnees, didn't care for that too much, so it creates this Dunmore's War. In October of 74, Dunmore, and by the way, the first Virginia Convention took place in the capital in Williamsburg. The only reason why, Dunmore's away. He's away heading to Ohio, leading one arm of the army, while Andrew Lewis is leading the other arm of the army, okay? They're heading to Chillicothe, Ohio, to the Shawnee villages. I mean, that is Augusta County, folks. That's why it was the colony and it was Augusta County, okay? So they're heading up there. Before they get to Chillicothe, Cornstalk does a surprise attack on not Dunmore, he's not involved, but on General Andrew Lewis, General Andrew Lewis's arm of the army. He has about 1,000 men that is mostly Augusta County and Botetourt County militiamen, okay? About 1,000 against 1,000 Indians. It would be I'm surprised there's not been a movie done on it because it was an intense battle. It was a bloody battle. Probably over 20% casualties on both sides. Unfortunately, and I think this painting is from the flood wall at the Point Pleasant State Park there. And if you look at the circle, that supposedly is Charles Lewis in his red hunting shirt. I mean, was that a target or what? Leading his Augusta County men, and he gets shot. Okay? Charles Lewis probably would have had a big role in the Revolution. I imagine he would have been a colonel, general. He would have had some big role, okay? Very well respected. He was in the French and Indian War. He was a lieutenant in William Preston's company of Augusta Rangers. Very well respected. He gets shot leading his men. What else can I say about him? He was so well respected in 1818, the Virginia General Assembly creates Lewis County. Still exists today in West Virginia. It's in the north central part of the state. It's Lewis County, named for Charles Lewis. He is the only one of the Lewis boys, Thomas, Andrew, and William, that was born in Virginia. When John Lewis and Margaret Lewis came to Virginia, he was born in 1736 in, I guess, Orange County at the time, okay? But he was a very well-respected person. I'm going to talk about William Preston here in a minute. Colonel William Preston of Fincastle County, in writing about Charles's death to Patrick Henry, wrote this: "Poor Charles Lewis was shot into clear ground, encouraging his men to advance. If the loss of a good man, a sincere friend, a brave officer deserves a tear, he certainly is entitled to it, okay? So you had a lot of folks respected him. And I tell you, Thomas Lewis had all kinds of family members at this battle. What is really confusing from a genealogy standpoint is you had Thomas, Andrew, and William all name their boys after their father and each other. You look here, there's 3 John Lewises. They're all first cousins. And they're leading companies, okay? You know, Charles Lewis is killed. William Fleming, have y'all heard anything about him? He's severely wounded. Colonel Field is killed. John Frog, second from the bottom. Thomas Lewis's son-in-law killed. His widow, Agatha, would marry Captain John Stewart there, who I mentioned at the bottom, and I'll talk about here in a minute. So Thomas has all of these family members and friends. Daniel Harrison behind me, Ford Harrison. His son Benjamin Harrison is leading the Augusta company there. Samuel McDowell is leading a company there. So it's a big battle. That happens. While that is happening, the Second Continental Congress is meeting. A lot of people don't consider, there's a lot of argument, is the Battle of Point Pleasant part of the Revolution? Most historians probably think not, but some probably argue it could be. It's taking place during this time, okay? Then you get to the Second Virginia Convention. It takes place in March. This is when Thomas Lewis makes his entrance. The citizens of Augusta County, they have an election and they elect Thomas Lewis, who's never been a Burgess before. You can go upstairs and read a lot of books. They say he was a Burgess. He was never a Burgess. He was a delegate to these conventions, which were like the House of Burgesses, but he was never a Burgess, okay? So he was elected by the citizens of Augusta County. He goes, and they meet at what I call St. John's Church. They called it the Henrico Parish Church then. You gotta remember, this is the village of Richmond. That is the biggest building in Richmond, so they could fit 120 men in. That's why they have it there. Plus, they wanted to get away from Dunmore, who's back in Williamsburg, who has the Royal Marines. And again, this is an illegal, unauthorized assembly. They wanted to get away from them, so they meet in Richmond, okay? And while they meet in Richmond, I personally think this is the greatest assembly of Virginians in history. Okay? When this is taking place, there's no Continental Congress going on. The one I just referred to a minute ago going on during the Battle of Point Pleasant is finished. They go back home. This is before you had a lot of the military men mobilized, so they're back home in Virginia. You have all 7 signers of the Declaration of Independence, Virginia, in this convention. Okay? In addition to that, you have George Washington. He didn't sign because he's with the Army. You got Peyton Randolph in the top there, who was elected by all the colonies to be the president of the Continental Congress. You have John Peter Muhlenberg up there, you probably heard of, Shenandoah County. He was a general in the war. Patrick Henry, Fleming, Archibald Gary, Benjamin Harrison. I mean, he was a signer. Jefferson, of course, was a signer. And again, I just think it's one of the greatest collections of Virginians in history there. You know, they're there. The Second Convention is really known for give me liberty or give me death. You know, you have all those men there. That includes 2 brothers, Thomas Lewis of Augusta, Andrew Lewis representing Botetourt. Okay? They're there with all these very important men. At this convention, they really mobilize. They call for a mobilizing to the creating the militia. It wasn't a unanimous vote, because you had some of the older members there, Tidewater with more English roots. They thought that was a bit rash, but Patrick Henry was a firebrand. I mean, he was a hell of a speaker. He motivated, and he pulled the convention his way, and they voted to mobilize, essentially, to create a militia. This is interesting. So think about this. All of this is going on. And Thomas Lewis, and more in particular, George Washington, is thinking about his Ohio River Valley lands. He's always thinking about his lands. The only time he probably wasn't was during the war, but he probably thought about it then. This is a letter written by Valentine Crawford. His brother, William Crawford, was one of the surveyors that Dunmore got around the proclamation line thing, kind of skirted Thomas Lewis and Preston. He did some surveys, and what's interesting here, if you read it, this is Valentine Crawford writing during the Second Convention, March 23rd. He's arrived at Mount Vernon to hand him surveys for George to take to Thomas Lewis to review while they're at the convention, but he misses him by 2 days. Okay? So it just goes to show you, with everything going on, they're talking about surveys and land. Okay? Anything else here to mention? I don't think so. And then there's another letter I find. This one up here is written by Fielding Lewis of Kenmore to his brother-in-law George on April 23rd, top right, and it says, on this day, received a survey of 578 acres for you from Thomas Lewis. Okay? This is George Washington's round bottom land. This is, if you look it up, this is 578 acres that is probably about 70 miles southwest of Pittsburgh in West Virginia on the Ohio River, probably only about an hour and a half from Columbus, Augusta County. That's why Thomas Lewis is involved. So again, this letter is written talking about these land surveys, and oh, by the way, you have 4 days after this letter is written, Concord and Lexington take place. Okay? You have on April 20th, a couple days before this, big ruckus in Williamsburg because Dunmore takes gunpowder from the magazine and just drives everybody crazy in Williamsburg, okay? And then a week after this is written, George Washington is heading off to the Continental Congress, okay? So all this is going on, right now there's a powder keg, and he's talking about his Ohio Valley lands, okay? Now this gets to my Virginia Tech connection. You probably wouldn't think that home is in Blacksburg, Virginia. It looks like Raleigh Tavern, okay? If you look on the horizon, there is Burris Hall and the buildings of Virginia Tech, okay? This home was the home of Colonel William Preston. Born in 1729, Scotch-Irish, came over, settled in Bellamy Manor, Augusta County. He is Thomas Lewis's second cousin. Their mothers are first cousins, okay? All right? He is Thomas Lewis didn't survey by himself. He had deputy surveyors, probably 4 or 5 at any time, helping him in the field. William Preston was his deputy surveyor from 1751 to 1769 until Botetourt County was formed in 1770, okay? So you have William Preston here. He's a big deal. If you read about William Preston, I suggest you do. He was a significant figure in Southwest Virginia. Just a couple of quick things. If you look at this here, there's a historical sign there. I'll let you read that, but I'll talk as you're reading it. William Preston, he ended up being a surveyor for Botetourt County, Fincastle County, and I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, in Montgomery County. He was the county lieutenant for the last 2, which means you're the highest ranking militia officer in that county, okay? He had his son, James Patton Preston. You all know your Augusta County history, James Patton, ring a bell? He was a big deal that was killed at Draper's Meadows on the Tech campus in 1755, okay? He's named for him. He was his uncle, okay? William Preston's uncle was James Patton. James Patton Preston's a governor of Virginia. William Preston's two grandsons are governors of Virginia, John Floyd, John Bell Floyd. Fun fact, Preston Library at VMI is named for, get this, John Thomas Lewis Preston was his name, okay? And he was a founding father of VMI, okay? He served there as 41 years as a professor. I'm running out of time here, my God. I'm going to have to come back, Penny. But I'm sorry about that. But he's a professor at VMI, and his brother-in-law is one too. Not as long as him. His name was Stonewall Jackson. Okay, they were brothers-in-law. So that was a fun fact. The last fun fact is William Ballard Preston. He was the grandson of William Preston, born at Smithfield, died at Smithfield. He owned Smithfield. He was a Secretary of Navy under Zachary Taylor's administration. In 1851, the Preston Olin Institute is established in Montgomery County there in Blacksburg, okay, named for William Ballard Preston. It's a Methodist, like Randolph-Macon, enriched Methodist school for boys. Hits hard times during the Civil War, is rechartered, and then the trustees of Preston Olin petitioned the General Assembly to become a land-grant university. It's accepted, you have Virginia Tech formed in 1872. So without Preston and Olin Institute, you would not have Virginia Tech. That's my connection there, okay? Real quick, these are the county formations. So you see how big Augusta County is. Stretches, and you show Kentucky there, and then it goes northwest. In 1770, Botetourt County is formed. Thomas Lewis passes his baton to William Preston. Now William Preston has the problem of a vast land area, and Thomas Lewis gets a bit smaller, but he still has the Ohio River Valley. You get to 1772, Fincastle County is formed. William Preston moves a little bit further west in Fincastle, Virginia. Very nice little village near Roanoke. We're seeing old structures, very nice village. And it's formed in 72. Then in 76, 77, it's abolished. And then you have Montgomery County, where Blacksburg is created, Washington County, and Abingdon. Any of y'all been to Abingdon before? One other fun fact, you ever seen the Martha Washington Inn? The middle building there is an antebellum home built in 1830 by William Preston's son, Francis. So William Preston's everywhere in Southwest Virginia, and his descendants. So anyway, I thought it might be interesting to see. And if you look at that very last one, you see A being Augusta. So the good thing about that, Thomas Lewis, he's getting up there in age. There's a lot of miles on his body with all the surveying he did. So the good thing is Augusta County got smaller and smaller, and he didn't have the work. Then in 1778, Rockingham's formed, right? And even got smaller. I read today or yesterday that today Augusta County is still the second largest county in Virginia behind Pittsylvania County, okay? And its size hasn't changed since Bath was created in 1790. That is Augusta, okay? Moving on real quick here. Thomas Lewis, that's at Linwood today. A lot of people, I don't know if that's an original structure to Thomas Lewis. It could be. Andy, you think it probably is? I've always heard it was. It could have been his office. Didn't have a chimney though, so it had been a cold office in the winter. But that does look like an 18th century structure. It's at Linwood today. So you have about 11 letters I've found that Thomas is writing from there to Smithfield on the right during the Revolutionary years, okay? This is one of them. Real quick, and you don't have to read that because I'm going to go ahead and read you an excerpt. I love this letter, okay? I'm going to read you portions of it that I have highlighted there. And this is Thomas Lewis writing to William Preston, his protege, his friend, his second cousin. And this is great. This is written 2 days after Bunker Hill, okay? The current at present sets strong on the side of liberty, I'm trying to say, continue to do so. You have heard of the movements at Boston. It is now certain that the troops of tyranny have lost at least 1,000 killed, wounded, etc. Yes, the Battle of Bunker Hill was just this fall 2 days before. If you continue reading, he talks about Ticonderoga. And again, I don't know if he's getting his facts through the Virginia Gazette, he probably is, or other letter writing, but he was right. Fort Ticonderoga was taken May 10th by Colonels Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold when he was a good guy, okay? So he's right there. He also writes, some say 3 generals and more troops have landed in Boston. Well, he's right there. General William Howe, Henry Clinton, and John Burgoyne have all arrived in Boston to help put down the rebellion. And Thomas Gage is, of course, commanding then. Then I love, and some of y'all who know history better than I do, I love this middle phrase. I don't know when the Yankee term started, but Thomas Lewis is using it in this letter. How about this? Those Yankees, as they are called, have nobly supported the cause of liberty. God grant them perseverance and success. Is that pretty cool? I mean, he's talking about that. The last sentence I just absolutely love, though. Think about this. Think about his brothers, Charles, who's been killed. Think about Andrew Lewis and all their military service in the French and Indian War and everything else. And look at this line here. Great expectations are formed on the prowess of the frontier counties. Of those in his hunting shirt, with his rifle and tomahawk in hand, is looked on as sufficient balance to 10 English mercenaries, the Hessians, okay? So much as the Virginian improved that British maxim that 1 Englishman is an overmatch to 3 Frenchmen. Is that a great sentence? I love that. I'm thinking about Mel Gibson in The Patriot, with the tomahawk and the long rifle. But I thought that was a great line. And as a matter of fact, the day that he's writing this in Philadelphia, John Adams has nominated George Washington to be the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. So all of this is taking place, okay? Moving on, okay? So I'm going to get through these real quick. Third convention happens. He's back in Richmond. He writes to William Preston from Richmond. This letter I found from Richmond. He's writing to Preston in Smithfield, and he says this: 1,000 regulars are voted to be divided into 2 regiments, the commander of the first one being Patrick Henry and the second William Walford. 8,000 minutemen and 16 battalions are to be trained and paid for the time of their training. 425 men for the post of 425 men for the post on the frontier, 200 of which are at Pittsburgh. At this time, I'm going to get to it in the later, Pittsburgh is considered part of Virginia. It's a big dispute between Pennsylvania and Virginia that goes on for a number of years. 25 at Wheeling and 100 at Ye Point. I think that's Point Pleasant. And then 100 with you, Mr. Preston, at Fincastle. Okay? Then we get to the fourth convention. This one meets briefly at Richmond. Then it moves to the Wren Building in Williamsburg at the college. Reason being, by this time, Dunmore's fled. So they don't have to worry. He's off on one of Her Majesty's ships somewhere. I can't remember at the time where he is. During this fourth convention, King George proclaims the 13 colonies in rebellion. You got General Montgomery up at Quebec getting defeated. And you got, as I note here on the left, you got the Battle of Great Bridge taking place. That's where I think Dunmore is down in Norfolk. So you had the Battle of Great Bridge taking place where they're defeated. And at this time, you have Common Sense by Thomas Paine being written in Philadelphia. So all this is going on then. Then we get to the most important convention and the last one, the fifth convention. This takes place from May to, I think, July of 76 at the Capitol building. It's a big deal. Just 2 months prior to this convention, on March 1st, the Continental Congress recognizes Andrew Lewis's extensive experience and appoints him brigadier general in the Continental Army with command over Virginia forces. Okay, so Thomas's younger brother. This is a rendering of the second Capitol. If you go to Williamsburg today, the rebuilt Capitol is the first Capitol. It burned. Then this one was built in 53. It was where they met, okay, until, and even afterwards in the General Assembly, until what happened in 1780, Williamsburg, the Capitol moves from Williamsburg to Richmond, okay? This then burns a little bit later. And again, what you see today is the first building. I'll let you read those bullet points. You guys, you know what happens here. You get the Virginia Convention meets. They introduce on May 15th the motion for independence. It's accepted. They send instructions to their members in the Continental Congress up in Philly, Richard Henry Lee. He then is, by the way, prior to that, you see that first bullet on May 10th of the convention, Thomas Lewis is one of the first representing Augusta County to put forward a motion for independence, and then other counties follow, okay? So all of that is happening. On May 15th, while they're introducing the motion for independence, they're also creating a committee. Again, a lot of the work done, I guess like today, in the conventions are done in committee work, and then they take it to the floor, okay? So Thomas Lewis is one of 30 men that is appointed to the committee to draft the Virginia Declaration of Rights and the state constitution. That's a pretty big deal, okay? So Thomas Lewis is on there. He gets there, and he's a member of a bunch of other committees. And just look at the names of the men that he is working with during this time, okay? A lot of his committee meetings are Mason, Henry, okay? I'll talk a little bit later, and when he gets to the first House of Delegates, those men turn into Jefferson and Madison, who he's working with. But here in this one, because those, of course, well, that's a good point. Remember, Madison was born in 51. He's at Princeton. He graduates. He finally makes the fifth convention, the only one he's involved with. And he's a 24 or 5-year-old scholar, okay? So he's involved. He's in a couple of these committee meetings, okay? So they're meeting. They get to the conclusion of the fifth convention, and they figure out they need to have a state seal. So they put Henry Mason, George Wythe on the committee that develops the seal that has remained unchanged for how many years, and Thomas Lewis is there to approve it with the other delegates. Okay? Pretty cool, right? We then get to, how many of you have been through the Governor's Palace at Williamsburg? A lot of us have, right? You go there and you see these reproduction chairs. These chairs in this settee are there today, okay? The original was sold when Thomas Lewis is at this convention. Dunmore's gone. He leaves hastily his governor's palace and leaves all his possessions behind. So the fifth convention, the delegates appoint commissioners to have a public sale and auction at the palace. Thomas Lewis is there, okay? He goes to the auction. I'll just scan through here. That chair, by the way, last week I was in the Abbey Rockefeller Museum. That chair is there, and Thomas Lewis bought them. He buys that suite of chairs and those settees for his daughter, Agatha, who married the John Stewart I talked about that was at Point Pleasant, okay? Their home is still standing today just outside of Lewisburg. Oh, and by the way, named for Andrew Lewis, okay? That home is still there, part of Greenbrier County now, but was Augusta County then. Thomas Lewis buys those. And part of that family history is that, yes, he bought it for their wedding present when they were married in November. This is June, July, okay? But how do we know that? I called the museum, and I talked to someone who was very helpful, and I asked them to go to the accession file. And they did, because I heard about this. While Thomas Lewis is there, he loves books. He buys a copy of Shakespeare's works that was in Dunmore's library. The middle bookplate says Murray, Earl of Dunmore. So that nails the provenance. That he was there, he bought it, he puts his bookplate on top there, he gives it to his son with his son-in-law with the furniture, and then John Stewart applies his bookplate. By then, it's Greenbrier County. That's pretty cool, right? So it shows you that Thomas Lewis was there and what he did. Okay, W&L connection. Maybe a lot of y'all know this, but the Scotch-Irish of the Valley created Augusta Academy. And during the patriotic spirit of the day in 1776, the original trustees, the Lewises, the Prestons, the Stewarts, the Scotch-Irishmen of the area who are the original trustees call it Liberty Hall Academy, okay? That became Washington Lee. If you Google Washington Lee and look up the colonial founders, they're going to list Thomas Lewis, okay? And that on the right is a big plaque on the wall of Lee's Chapel. I took that photo, and it has the names of William Preston, Andrew Lewis, Thomas Lewis, Samuel McDowell, and those contemporaries of his day. Then I get to this letter here. He writes in August of 1776 to William Preston. This one's funny. Let me get through this real quick. I knew I had too many slides. I apologize. Here, let's look real quick. He writes this to Andrew Lewis to frame up this discussion. He's writing this, and at the time, William Preston is at Smithville, there, adjacent to the Virginia Tech campus. In August of 76, he's having problems. Again, he's the county lieutenant. He's having problems with Cherokee Indian raids on the frontier. Matter of fact, in August of 74, Preston wrote George Washington telling him he built a stockade around Smithville to protect him from the Indians, okay? And what had happened is Lewis and Preston are writing, and they're talking about these raids and how the British agents are inciting the Cherokees to attack the frontier. And they're writing this back and forth. Now, real quick, who knows here what Augusta County is named, who it's named for? Anybody know? It's named for King George's mother, Augusta. Okay? There you go. That's a sign. And she was a German princess, a Hessian. So I'm telling you that to set this up. He writes this letter, and this cracks me up. The poor savages, the instruments of these calamities, are innocent compared with ye diabolical train of villains, ranging from the son of a Hessian whore to ye meanest reptile been employed. What? Who's he talking about? I think we know what Thomas Lewis thought of King George III and his mother, calling her a Hessian whore. So, I mean, Thomas Lewis is a passionate revolutionary, I'm telling you, by then. I got a kick out of that. Then we get to the Virginia, first in October and December of 76, after the Fifth Convention. Thomas Lewis is again reelected. He's a member of the House of Delegates. He goes, he's on many committees. Thomas Lewis, these are the only legislatures he was ever involved with. And this, I think, shows you how highly regarded he was, that he's never been to a House of Burgesses. He's never been to anything after this, but during this time when men needed to step up and lead and be an old sage and provide their wisdom and guidance, Thomas Lewis was the guy, okay? So he's there with these men. Now Thomas Lewis is there with Jefferson and Mason again, Benjamin Harrison, Pendleton, Madison, etc. He's on these notable committees. Again, like I said, now he's serving with Jefferson. He's on the committee with Jefferson on the Committee of Religion that leads to the Statute of Religious Freedom that Jefferson does. He's working with Jefferson on the division of Fincastle County. In 1778, real quick, so he's done. He goes back to Linwood. He goes home. While he's going home, the battles of Princeton and Trenton are fought. Okay? That kind of gives you the timeline. So he's back home. He's now basically retired. He's, 58, 60 or so. Congress asked him to serve because if you read the Cardinal News, I'll get that. That's an article they did. Shenandoah Valley men helped negotiate the first formal U.S. treaty with Native Indians. It was Thomas and Andrew Lewis. They called, you see the Journal of Congress, where they asked Andrew and Thomas Lewis to go to Fort Pitt, Pittsburgh, to sit down with the Delaware Indian chiefs White Eyes, Tobacco Pipe, and Killbuck. And they're basically trying to work out a treaty to allow the Continental Army to march through the Delaware territory, heading to Fort Detroit to attack the British and Indian allies. So you got Thomas Lewis and Andrew there with the Continental troops in that negotiation, okay? I'm watching the Ken Burns Revolutionary series, and he's talking about this. And I grabbed my phone because they show that. That's a photo I took off my TV, and look who's Thomas Lewis's signature, okay? Okay, and then 1779, he's called back out. Again, Virginia and Pittsburgh for 10, 15 years are arguing about Pittsburgh. Whose is it, okay? And so they called Thomas Lewis out to be one of the three commissioners. The other two commissioners are Reverend Robert Andrews, and the other one is Reverend James Madison. The son, he's the nephew of Thomas. He's the son of John Madison and I think Agatha Strother of Madison Hall and Port Republic. I didn't know that. Was a fun fact. I didn't know that. He became a reverend, active in the Anglican Church afterwards. If you look there, and my brother's a William and Mary, I sent this to him recently. He was the president of William and Mary College, James Madison of Port Republic, for 35 years during the Revolution and there afterwards. He's one of the representatives. Long story short, Thomas didn't go. Communication then could be slow, missing things. And Thomas Lewis writes to Governor Benjamin Harrison his thoughts on everything, but he did not get to attend. And some say that what ended up happening, they just extended the Mason-Dixon line. Pittsburgh became part of Pennsylvania. Some say, what if Thomas Lewis was there, especially with his land expertise? Could the map be different today? Who knows, right? Now, 1781, Andrew Lewis is in Richmond. He's on the Thomas Nelson Jr. Executive Council meeting. This is I think a week before Washington takes his troops out of Williamsburg to march to Yorktown. He's in there at the council meeting. He leaves to ride back home to Salem, Virginia, his home. He's in Bedford and he dies, okay? In 1858, I'm not sure how many of y'all know this, the Washington Monument at the Capitol Square is built. And there it is. And the men surrounding it are Thomas Jefferson, George Mason, Thomas Nelson Jr., John Marshall, James Madison, I think, and Andrew Lewis with his long rifle in hand. And there he is. And some say the model for the statue, they said Samuel Hance Lewis of Lewiston had a strong resembled strongly Andrew, so they used him as a model for the statue, I read, okay? Then you get to really quick the end of the war. This is really good for us Valley folks, Harrisonburg, Rockingham County folks here. This is a letter that Thomas Lewis writes to Thomas Nelson Jr., okay? The new governor, the governor of Virginia. He's writing this because how many of y'all know the Daniel Smith story? It's a pretty sad story. Daniel Smith of Rockingham County is the county lieutenant, okay? The chief military officer. His brother Abraham was the one before him, okay? Yorktown's taking place. Daniel Smith with his, I read 3 or 4 sons. Daniel Smith with his 3 or 4 sons march off to Yorktown. They're there for the Cornwallis surrender. They come back to Harrisonburg, and there's a victory celebration. Shots are fired, Daniel Smith's horse takes off, and he dies from his injuries after getting back. So then you have Thomas Lewis writing this letter to, and by the way, who is leading the Virginia militia forces at Yorktown is the governor and the colonel, Thomas Nelson Jr. You know the story, he's the one that supposedly tells the Continental Army, it's okay to fire my home. My home's in Yorktown, fire away, okay? You can read that, but anyway. So he writes this letter. I wish you had time to read it. It's pretty neat, everything he writes in it, but it worked. Thomas Nelson Jr. did appoint Benjamin Harrison. So behind me is Fort Harrison, okay, Daniel Harrison's home. His son, Benjamin Harrison, who fought at Point Pleasant, was a county lieutenant, was appointed, and was it? Yeah, and was the wife. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, so you got that. That takes us through the Revolution. I have more stuff, Penny, but I probably don't have the time because you get to, if you have a chance, go read the 2 letters that Thomas Lewis exchanged with George Washington. I thought they're awesome. You got to remember, this is Thomas Lewis and Washington don't see each other from the second convention to the end of the war. Okay? George Washington resigns his commission in Annapolis, I think it was, or New York, in 83. He goes back home. A month after he's back home from fighting the war for how many years, what's he want to talk about? His round bottom lands. So he's writing Thomas Lewis, and the first part I did there, the last part I just put there was, look at the very last sentence. On the death of your brother, General Lewis, I most sincerely condole with you as I had while he was living a sincere friendship and regard for him. The other part here I love because he's saying, basically, Thomas, I need your help again in these lands. I'm sorry to inconvenience you. But then he writes, I can see that it is altogether unnecessary, my good dear sir, to offer a reason. I've been busy for the last 9 years, okay? So I thought that was pretty good. And then you have the response I thought was great from Thomas Lewis. He writes of reciprocating to George, I'm so sorry for the loss of your brother-in-law and my good friend Fielding Lewis. He then, just go read that when you have this. Now, sir, permit me to present you with my compliments of congratulations on your safe arrival at your seat in your native country, not only on account of your safe return, but also on the wreath of laurel with you have crowned, a crown the more glorious as it is a gift of merit not bestowed on you by your country only, but by the suffrage of all Europe. But in more particular manner, by all who have regard to liberty and common rights of mankind. But I must not offend your delicacy by picturing you to the overflows of my heart on the various objects, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, how about that? You know, so they exchange these letters. A short 8 months later, Washington visits A. Gabriel Jones and Thomas Lewis at Linwood for 2 days to work on navigation issues, land issues. There's a great picture of Gabriel Jones, the only one of the 3 we have that. A rendering of his home. I think his home and Thomas Lewis were like Smithfield, those Williamsburg colonials. And then lastly, the ratifying convention of 1788. Thomas Lewis, how many years later is that? The citizens of Rockingham County pull him out of retirement because they want him and his neighbor Gabriel Jones to represent them to ratify the Constitution. with all and you got to remind, the men here are all contemporaries of Madison, born in the 50s or 40s. Thomas Lewis is the oldest delegate of 180 men at this convention. And with Gabriel Jones is probably in the top 10 oldest. And they, of course, with all the Valley men in these counties, the only area in the state that all voted yes for the Constitution, okay? And what I have here, this letter from Morris to Maury is written, I love it. I was, during this hard winter, to see your old friend Thomas Lewis. He is, you may be sure, a strong advocate for the Constitution, and if you could but transfer yourself across the Atlantic, Murray was in Liverpool, England at the time, with a wish you might spend a few hours agreeably with the old man and hearing him abuse the anti-constitutionalists. So again, Thomas Lewis would speak his mind. And lastly, it's late, tomorrow's Friday. Go have a Devil's Backbone Vienna lager, and here's why. This is a Thomas Lewis connection, believe it or not. When the brewery was established, the owners, before they sold to Anheuser-Busch, they wanted to name it from something of the region. So how they found the Fairfax Line Journal that Thomas Lewis kept, I don't know, but if you read their website, and they talk about Peter Jefferson, they picked a passage, and Thomas Lewis, I went to special collections at UVA, where the journal is today, and there you go. October, Friday 3rd, he's surveying, and Thomas Lewis writes, Pole, blah, 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 Devil's Backbone. That's how the brewery company started their name. So go have a beer on Thomas Lewis tomorrow night, all right? There you go. Anyway, sorry I went too long there, Penny.
I don't think people will be complaining. Thank you so much. We talk a lot about trying to make connections, and I can't even keep track of all the dots you've connected. So I just sort of have this feeling that I understand the society of the Lewises, the Prestons, and everybody else in Augusta County at the time. I don't know that we have time for questions. So I think
catch
that
me afterwards, that's fine.
I'm sure he will stay if people are ready to go. Thank you for coming. This was really terrific. I'm sorry you didn't get the tobacco box, but
I got some books though.
we once went up against Colonial Williamsburg,
Right,
and we
right,
didn't get ours either.
When the Revolutionary War Museum got it, I was happy.
That's right. We can all visit our artifacts down at the big boys. Okay, thank you so much for coming. This was delightful, and we appreciate you sharing all of that. If you want to take a deeper dive or you want to watch it again, it'll be on YouTube. Also, John has compiled, a rather large.
I'm not a writer. There's no bibliography. There's probably a lot of plagiarism in it that I did for myself.
Yeah, so
And I gave Penny a thumb drive with it that you can come and get a copy of it.
right, or you can look at our library copy. So we thank you for that as well. Very, very generous. And once again, thank you to John Batzel.
Yeah, thank you.